Crates stamped "Made in Germany" sit on cold docks, stacked with precision and care. Steel beams, chemical drums, finely machined parts wait under gray skies to be loaded onto ships. The factories behind them still hum. Workers still clock in. Smoke still rises from chimneys along rivers and rail lines. To the casual observer, this looks like survival, even recovery. Germany is producing. Germany is working. Germany, it seems, is back on its feet. The common story says Germany was crushed after the First World War by inflation, unemployment, and political chaos. Images of worthless banknotes and desperate crowds dominate memory. But that story skips over something more deliberate and more dangerous. Germany was not first destroyed by disorder. It was restrained by design. Its exports were not merely sold on open markets. They were seized through systems built to look neutral, legal, and unavoidable. No soldiers stood on the docks. No flags were lowered. Yet control was exercised all the same. Think about what exports meant to Germany after defeat. They were not a luxury. They were a lifeline. The country lacked sufficient food, fuel, and raw materials. Survival depended on selling industrial goods abroad and using the proceeds to buy essentials back in. Trade was the bridge between production and stability. Without control over export earnings, recovery was not just difficult, it was structurally impossible. This is where the story becomes colder. Germany was allowed to work, but not allowed to benefit fully from that work. Factories could run, orders could be filled, ships could sail. Yet the profits of that labor were no longer entirely Germany's to use. They were claimed elsewhere, filtered through rules and accounts that redirected value before it reached the nation that produced it. The punishment was not visible on the factory floor, but it was absolute in effect. What made this system so effective was how ordinary it appeared. Trade continued. Contracts were honored. Goods moved across borders. On paper, everything looked fair. Germany was not banned from commerce. It was not blockaded. Instead, it was enclosed within a framework that decided, in advance, where the value of its exports would go. The battlefield was trade. The weapon was accounting. Imagine standing in a warehouse watching goods prepared for export, knowing that success would not translate into relief at home. The more that was shipped out, the harder it became to secure what was needed inside the country. This inversion defied common sense. Work usually promises reward. Here, effort produced obligation. That contradiction sat at the heart of the post-war German economy, even before many understood it. The stakes were enormous because this system reached into every corner of society. Industrialists needed foreign buyers. Workers needed wages tied to stable markets. Farmers depended on imported tools and fertilizers. Cities required steady food supplies. All of it hinged on trade earnings flowing back freely. When that flow was restricted, pressure built everywhere at once. Recovery turned into endurance. Hope narrowed into frustration. This story matters because it reveals a form of power that does not announce itself. Economic punishment does not always arrive with sanctions or blockades. It can be embedded inside procedures that claim to enforce fairness. Systems can be designed to look balanced while producing asymmetric outcomes. Germany's experience shows how agency can be stripped without occupation, and how sovereignty can be limited without redrawing borders. At every factory gate and port warehouse, the same question lingered, whether spoken or not. How can a nation rebuild when the profits of its labor never truly belong to it? How long can productivity substitute for control? These questions did not stay economic for long. They seeped into politics, identity, and resentment. When effort fails to improve life, explanations are sought elsewhere. No tanks were needed to impose this condition. No new borders were crossed. The mechanisms operated through paperwork, agreements, and oversight. They were enforced by expectations rather than force. That is what made them so durable. Resistance was difficult because the system claimed legitimacy. It was not framed as punishment, but as settlement. Not as domination, but as order. Germany's docks remained busy. Its engineers remained skilled. Its reputation for quality endured. All the visible signs of capacity were still there. What was missing was freedom over outcomes. The nation could produce value, but not decide its destination. That distinction changed everything. It transformed exports from a path to recovery into a channel of extraction. The consequences of this arrangement would extend far beyond economics. They would shape how Germans understood defeat, fairness, and the international system itself. But at this stage, none of that had fully surfaced. What existed first was a quiet realization spreading through workshops and offices. Something was wrong. The country was working, yet not advancing. The effort was real. The reward was not. This is the opening of a story not about collapse, but about constraint. Not about chaos, but about control exercised through normality. Germany's factories kept running. Its ships kept sailing. But from the very beginning, the value of what they carried was already spoken for. On the surface, interwar Germany looked resilient. The war had scarred cities and families, but the industrial core remained largely intact. Machines that once fed the war effort were repurposed for civilian production. Engineers returned to drafting tables. Skilled laborers stepped back onto factory floors. The knowledge had not vanished. The capacity was still there. In workshops and foundries, there was a quiet determination to prove that defeat had not erased competence. Factories restarted their machines with familiar rhythms. Coal moved along railways. Steel poured into molds. Chemical plants resumed controlled precision. German goods retained their reputation for quality and reliability, often outperforming competitors in foreign markets. Buyers noticed. Orders flowed in from abroad, driven by need and respect for craftsmanship. This was not charity. It was demand. To many, it felt like vindication. Institutions were rebuilt to manage this revival. Trade offices reopened. Banks resumed operations. Commercial law was restored to provide predictability. The mechanics of exchange returned with reassuring regularity. Contracts were signed. Invoices issued. Ships scheduled. To outside observers, Germany appeared capable of recovery through discipline and productivity. This was not a shattered agrarian society. It was an industrial engine clearing its throat. Ports came back to life. Cranes swung over docks. Warehouses filled with outbound goods. Rail yards buzzed with activity as finished products moved toward the coast. Trade fairs displayed innovation and technical skill, offering a vision of normalcy returning piece by piece. Imagine the relief inside boardrooms as export contracts were finalized, or on factory floors when steady work replaced uncertainty. The belief took hold that labor and exports would rebuild what war had destroyed. That belief mattered deeply. It kept people working. It prevented despair from hardening too quickly. Exports promised more than revenue. They promised dignity. The idea that Germany could work its way out of defeat carried moral weight. Production became a statement. Every shipment signaled that the country still belonged in the world economy, not as a supplicant, but as a participant. Foreign buyers reinforced this confidence. They treated German firms as capable partners, not pariahs. Payments were arranged. Schedules agreed upon. Trade moved across borders with an appearance of normal commerce. This visibility mattered. It suggested that the past could be contained, that economic life could proceed without constant reference to loss and blame. For a time, that appearance sustained hope. Cities hummed again with purposeful motion. Workshops trained apprentices. Engineers refined processes. The rhythm of production created the illusion of momentum. Newspapers reported rising export figures. Politicians spoke of stabilization through hard work. The narrative was simple and persuasive. Germany would earn its way back. Industry would restore balance. Trade would heal wounds that politics could not. Yet this surface strength hid a dangerous constraint. The ability to produce did not guarantee the ability to benefit. While factories ran and goods moved, the path from sale to national recovery was no longer direct. The structure governing trade earnings was changing quietly, away from public view. What looked like normal exchange was already being shaped by external claims. From inside Germany, the signs were subtle. Cash flow felt tighter than expected. Imports required careful rationing. Despite strong exports, shortages lingered. The connection between effort and improvement felt weaker than promised. These signals were easy to dismiss at first. Recovery is never smooth. Adjustment takes time. That explanation held just long enough. Confidence persisted because production itself was visible. Machines do not lie. Ships loaded with goods felt like proof that progress was real. The system appeared to reward diligence. As long as factories stayed open and orders arrived, it was possible to believe that the worst was over. This belief sustained cooperation and patience, even as underlying pressures accumulated. The danger lay precisely there. Strength delayed scrutiny. Activity masked constraint. The more Germany worked, the more convincing the illusion became. Recovery seemed to be unfolding, measured in output and contracts rather than outcomes. Few questioned where the value ultimately settled. Fewer still grasped how tightly trade had been bound to obligations beyond Germany's control. Interwar Germany stood in a moment of suspended expectation. It was producing, exporting, and organizing itself with impressive speed. To many, this signaled renewal. But the system that governed these flows was already redirecting rewards elsewhere. The engine was running, but the fuel was being siphoned off. For now, the noise of production drowned out that realization. Germany appeared capable of recovery through work and exports, and that appearance mattered. It kept the country moving forward, even as the path ahead narrowed invisibly. The surface told one story. The structure beneath it was preparing another. The braking mechanism did not announce itself with crisis. It arrived as procedure. Germany's export earnings did not vanish in transit. They were captured the moment they arrived. Instead of receiving payment in free foreign currency, the proceeds were routed into controlled clearing accounts. On paper, Germany was being paid. In practice, the money stopped moving. It was credited, recorded, and then reassigned before German authorities could decide how to use it. Foreign buyers paid as agreed. The transaction looked complete, but the currency did not flow into Germany's economy with full freedom. It entered a system designed to intercept value and redirect it toward reparation obligations. Exports became something new. They were no longer a source of profit. They were a mechanism of enforcement. Each shipment triggered deductions. Each sale activated claims that Germany could not refuse. This changed the logic of trade completely. Normally, exports generate resources that expand choice. Here, they narrowed it. The more Germany sold abroad, the more it fed a system that drained purchasing power away from domestic use. Import needs remained unchanged. Food, fuel, and raw materials still required real payment. But the earnings meant to cover those costs were being skimmed before they could be applied. Pressure built quickly, though not always visibly. To secure the same volume of imports, Germany had to export more. Output increased, but relief did not follow. This was not an efficiency. It was design. The clearing system transformed reparations from a fixed burden into a moving drain. Effort no longer reduced the problem. It deepened it. Inside ministries and banks, the reality became clear first. Accounts balanced on paper, while shortages grew in practice. Every export success tightened the bind. Officials faced an impossible equation. Reducing exports meant losing access to imports. Increasing exports meant increasing deductions. There was no neutral option. The system punished both action and restraint. This imbalance hardened into routine. What began as an arrangement became infrastructure. Clearing accounts turned into fixtures of economic life. Transactions passed through them automatically, without debate. Control was exercised through repetition rather than force. Over time, the extraordinary became normal. Germany's economy adjusted to a state of permanent extraction. The cause and effect were brutal. Export success increased obligations. Increased obligations reduced domestic availability. Reduced availability raised prices and resentment. Workers produced more yet felt poorer. Farmers faced higher costs without relief. Industrialists saw output rise, while capital remained scarce. Different groups experienced different symptoms, but the source was shared. Ask what incentive remains when production no longer improves national life. Pride in work cannot substitute forever for material stability. When effort fails to translate into security, trust erodes. The clearing system severed the link between labor and reward. That rupture mattered more than any single policy decision. Politically, the consequences were immediate and corrosive. Moderation relied on the promise that discipline would pay off. The system made that promise impossible to keep. Leaders who urged patience appeared complicit in a structure they could not change. Extremes gained ground because they offered explanations that matched lived experience. The economy was working, yet people were not benefiting. Someone somewhere was taking the difference. What made resistance difficult was the system's legitimacy. It operated under international agreements. It was enforced through accounting rather than troops. There was no clear moment to oppose, no single lever to pull. Default threatened isolation. Compliance guaranteed stagnation. The clearing mechanism removed choice while preserving the appearance of order. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. Each negotiation focused on technical adjustments rather than structural change. Temporary relief measures were proposed and withdrawn. None altered the core reality. The system existed to ensure transfers, not recovery. Its success was measured by extraction, not stability. Germany found itself exporting not to grow, but to service obligations that expanded with effort. The economy ran faster just to stay in place. Over time, this dynamic reshaped behavior. Hoarding replaced investment. Controls replaced confidence. The clearing system taught firms and households the same lesson. Productivity alone would not secure the future. This was the turning point. Reparations ceased to be a defined cost and became a permanent condition embedded in trade. The mechanism ensured that improvement would not accumulate domestically. Growth flowed outward by design. Germany was no longer working for itself alone. It was working within a system that converted effort into dependence. Once established, the clearing arrangement proved difficult to dismantle. It was self-justifying. Any attempt to loosen it raised fears of non-payment. Those fears reinforced the very controls that caused instability. The logic was circular and airtight. The more strained Germany became, the more oversight was deemed necessary. Factories continued to operate. Ships continued to sail. On the surface, nothing dramatic changed. Yet beneath that continuity, the economy was being hollowed out. Value left as reliably as it was created. The system did not need to break Germany. It only needed to prevent recovery. This was economic power at its most refined. It did not destroy capacity. It redirected outcomes. It allowed production while denying benefit. And by doing so, it reshaped the political and social landscape without ever firing a shot. Germany remained active, disciplined, and industrious. But the clearing system ensured that its labor served purposes beyond its control. The consequences were corrosive because they unfolded in plain sight. Factories remained open. Goods continued to move. Output figures suggested effort and competence. Yet living standards refused to rise in proportion. For many, life felt harder despite visible productivity. This gap between work and reward bred confusion first, then anger. When economies promise progress through effort and fail to deliver, belief collapses faster than output ever could. Trade lost its promise as a path to recovery. What once symbolized dignity and renewal became associated with loss. Each successful export felt less like achievement and more like extraction. The idea that hard work would restore stability no longer matched daily experience. Workers saw wages squeezed by shortages. Consumers faced higher prices. Farmers struggled with costs that outpaced returns. The economy functioned, but it did not heal. Public faith in economic fairness deteriorated quickly. The rules appeared neutral, yet outcomes felt punitive. Those who worked hardest often felt the most betrayed. Discipline brought no relief. Compliance brought no stability. The system rewarded neither patience nor productivity. Moderation lost credibility because it offered no explanation that matched reality. Extremes gained ground not because they were subtle, but because they were simple. Politics absorbed the pressure that economics created. The clearing system did more than move money. It reshaped perceptions of justice and power. Many Germans concluded that the international order itself was structured against them. This belief did not require propaganda. It was reinforced by daily transactions that felt rigged. Trust in institutions, both domestic and foreign, eroded steadily. Internationally, the arrangement hardened divisions. What was framed as orderly settlement came to be seen as permanent discipline. Cooperation felt one-sided. Negotiation felt performative. Each year of continued extraction deepened resentment and suspicion. The system could enforce payments, but it could not enforce legitimacy. Over time, that imbalance proved destabilizing. Eventually, the structure began to crack under its own weight. Controls multiplied as confidence vanished. Defaults loomed as political pressure intensified. Trade barriers rose. The clearing arrangements that once seemed precise and rational became unworkable in practice. The system unraveled not because it was challenged directly, but because it exhausted the society it depended on. By the time confrontation replaced cooperation, the damage was already done. The economic relationship had reshaped political behavior and public mood. Compromise was no longer trusted. The memory of enforced trade lingered longer than the mechanism itself. Even when systems changed, their effects endured in attitudes and alignments. The deeper lesson remained. When exports are severed from national benefit, production turns into punishment. Work without reward breeds radicalization. Discipline without relief destroys legitimacy. Economic systems do not merely allocate resources. They shape belief. They teach societies what effort is worth and who ultimately controls outcomes. In the long run, this episode revealed a new form of power. Control trade flows, and a state can be disciplined without occupation. Factories can run while autonomy erodes. Ships can sail while value is captured elsewhere. The interwar clearing system became a template studied and feared, not because it was chaotic, but because it was efficient. Germany's experience demonstrated that economic arrangements can enforce outcomes as effectively as armies. Capacity alone is not power. Control over results is. A nation may retain its skills, its workers, and its industries, yet lose the ability to decide who benefits from them. That distinction defines modern economic coercion. Germany's factories kept running. Its ports stayed busy. Its people worked. But the value of their labor was redirected by design. That reality reshaped Europe's future far beyond balance sheets. It proved that systems built to appear fair can produce deeply unequal consequences. And it showed that when economic agency is removed, political stability soon follows. The lesson endures because the mechanism is reusable. Trade can liberate, but it can also constrain. Systems can integrate economies while quietly stripping choice. The story is not about one country alone. It is about how power can operate through rules rather than force. For those who seek to understand how history is shaped by ledgers as much as by armies, this pattern matters. If this story sharpens perspective, this is the moment to subscribe and share, so these hidden dynamics are not forgotten again.